In this lesson, we'll cover the different types of tools, how to install them, and how to configure the conditions. Let's start with the tools. There are three types of tools: pens, cutting tools, and creasing tools. The FC4500 is supplied with a fiber-tipped pen as well as a cutting tool. The FC4500-50 is not supplied with a creaser tool, so it will have to be purchased from your dealer or Graphtec. The FC4510-60 is supplied with a fiber-tipped pen, creaser tool, as well as a cutting tool. Take note that the pens are fiber-tipped and do dry out. Therefore, get in the habit of capping the pens once you have finished using them. The FC4500 series is supplied with a 1.5mm red-tip knob blade tool. To install the blade into the blade holder, take the blade holder out of the box and remove the cap. Take the new blade, insert it into the cap, and then screw the cap back onto the blade holder tool. Remove the black cap that covers the blade tip. Extension of the blade is important because it helps obtain clean cuts. The goal is to extend the blade to the thickness of the media that you plan to cut. If the blade is extended too far, it can wear out the adhesive mat or panel, or if you're using an adhesive mat, it will cut down the lifespan of the mat. To extend the blade, turn the red knob clockwise. To verify the blade is extended to the correct length, start by placing it against the edge of the media you plan to cut, and then adjust the blade length so that it extends just beyond the thickness of the media. As an added step, you can take the blade holder tool in your hand and with pressure, cut the media on the edge. If it splits easily, then it is extended far enough. Next, take the blade tool and mount it into the tool holder by loosening the thumb screw. Loosen it enough to where the C-clamp clears the tool holder. When inserting the blade tool, push it all the way, making sure it is completely seated. Then, once seated, tighten the thumb screw. If you plan to use the pen tool, it can be installed in the same manner. If you own the FC4500-50, place the pen in the pen station. The next step is to configure the conditions. Conditions are like tool or media presets. Each condition can be configured for different types of media or different types of cutting. For instance, Condition 1 can be configured for plotting, Condition 2 for cutting, and Condition 3 for creasing. This eliminates the need to adjust the settings each time you change a tool or material. There are 8 conditions, each configured for different media and material you may plan to use. Each condition has 4 main settings of force, speed, offset or tool type, and quality, which is another word for how quickly it accelerates to full speed, generally around the corners. The steps for configuring a condition begin by first selecting a condition, adjusting the settings, such as the amount of force or speed, and then testing the condition configuration by performing a test cut. Currently, the display screen is showing that it is set to Condition 1, where the force is 12, the speed is 30, the offset or tool type is pen, and the quality is to 4. To switch over to a different condition, such as Condition 2, we can press F2, and immediately it is switched to Condition 2. Pressing F3 will then switch the condition to Condition 3, where it has its own setting or configuration, and pressing F4 will switch to Condition 4. As you can see, we've been able to switch between the first 4 conditions, Conditions 1, 2, 3, and 4. Recall though that there are 8 conditions. Accessing Conditions 5 through 8 is a matter of pressing one of the function keys twice. For instance, if F1 is pressed, it switches to Condition 1 once again. But if you press F1 again, it now switches to Condition 5. If you press F2, it switches to condition 2. If you press F2 again, it switches to condition 6. F3 toggles between condition 3 and then condition 7. And F4 toggles between condition 4 and condition 8. In other words, each function key acts as a toggle between a lower and a higher condition. You've probably noticed that when you switch between certain conditions on the FC4510-60, that the tool carriage jostles or shifts a little. This is because each condition is assigned to a certain tool on the FC4510-60. The default setting is that conditions 1 through 4 are assigned to tool 1, and conditions 5 through 8 are assigned to tool 2. Later, we will cover how to reassign each condition to tool 1 or tool 2. The factory default for the condition may not suit the materials or the type of cutting you plan to use. Then the next task would be to configure the conditions to suit your particular needs. To do this, load the material that you plan to cut onto the flatbed cutter you're using. Next, switch to the condition to be configured. In this case, we'll choose condition 1 again by pressing the F1 key. To configure condition 1, press condition. If you remember, this is one of the action keys on the control panel that is located in the upper right corner of the control panel. The cutter goes from ready mode to change mode, as shown on the display screen. The blinking square, which is called the cursor, is always beside the value to be adjusted. In this case, it is located near the force value. It will always start at that value since generally force is the most frequently adjusted value. Let's assume that the material for this condition should have a force value of 30. Currently, it's set to 12. The arrow keys can be used to change values, and that's what we're going to do here. To increase this value, press the up arrow key to increase the value and set the force value to 30. The offset or tool type should be adjusted to the blade type that is going to be used. The blade type will be 15U. This can be obtained by looking at the case the blades came in. As you see here, it has CB15U or 15U, and that's the blade type we'll use for this condition. To adjust the blade type, press F3 to position the blinking cursor next to the offset value. By the way, each value is known by the labeling around the display screen. To change the offset value or the blade type, press the side arrow key, which will cycle through the different blade types, until it reaches 15U. The value next to it can adjust how the cutting tool type handles the corners, whether to sharpen or round the corner. Since we're just trying to change the blade type, we can keep this value at 0. Let's lower the speed to 20. Press F2 for speed, and then press the down arrow key to set it to 20. We can leave the quality as is, and then press Enter to set this condition with the new values. As a note, if Next were pressed, the condition would revert to the previous values. To verify that the new settings of this condition will work, we can perform a test cut. This is done by pressing the Test button once, and then pressing F1. This cuts a pattern of a square and a triangle in our material. To check the pattern, pull out the test pattern. The pattern should have a clean cut with sharp corners. In this case, the pattern is clean, but if it wasn't, the values, particularly the force, would be adjusted. Condition 1 is configured and is ready to be used for this material. Let's configure another condition for plotting with a pen. We need to use a condition that is assigned to, or that controls, pen 2. Let's configure condition 5, since this will allow us to easily toggle between the two conditions by pressing F1. Therefore, let's switch to condition 5 by pressing F1 again, which will have the unit switch to condition 5. And you'll notice the head moves. Of course, if you are using the FC4500-50, the tool head will grab the pen tool from the pen tool station on the side. Let's press the condition key again to configure condition 5. The force has to be adjusted to the value of 12. Since the blinking cursor is placed near the force value, we can adjust it by pressing the down arrow key and setting it to 12. Since pens allow for higher speeds, let's set the speed to 30. We'll press the F2 key to get the cursor next to the speed value, and then increase the value to 30 by pressing the up arrow key once again. Next, set the tool offset to pen by pressing F3. Once again, press the side arrow key to cycle through until pen displays. The quality is set correctly, so we'll keep that as is. Once again, press the enter key to set the condition with the new values. Now that the cutting tool condition and the pen tool condition have been configured, let's configure one more condition for the creaser tool. First, let's switch out the pen tool and replace it with the creaser tool. As a note, since the creasing force needs a higher force, it is recommended that the main tool be swapped out with the cutting tool instead of the pen tool. In this case, to remove the pen tool, loosen the thumb screw enough to pull the pen out, and replace the cap so it doesn't dry out. Always try to get into the habit of doing this. Next, take the creaser tool and install it into the second tool holder. We've loosened the thumb screw enough so that now we can seat the tool all the way until it stops, and then tighten the thumb screw again, making sure the C-clamp is over the lip of the creaser tool. We'll need to use another condition for the creaser. Since it is in tool holder 2, we need to select another condition from 5 through 8 to set up for our creaser. Since condition 5 is already configured for the pen, we can use condition 6 for our creaser tool. By pressing the F2 key, we can toggle between condition 2 and 6 until condition 6 is showing. Let's adjust this condition by pressing the condition key. For a creaser, the force should be set to around 40. And the speed should be around 25. The offset or tool type has to be set to the creasing tool. Pressing F3 will place the blinking cursor near the offset value. The creasing tool that comes with the FC4500-60 will have the offset tool value of CP001, so we'll press the side arrow keys again until we see CP001. The quality can remain the same. Press Enter to accept or establish the new values. When this is done, the screen will display an added menu with options specifically for the creaser tool. There are 4 settings: mode, count, spacing, and the start and ending positions. Values and settings are adjusted similarly to the condition settings. There are 3 modes to choose from. Mode 1 draws a crease line that is the same position as the actual line data from your drawing or design. Mode 2 draws a crease line on each side of the actual line data, but will not draw the actual line. In other words, it will draw 2 lines outside of where the original line is in your design. Mode 3 draws a crease line not only where the original or actual line is, but also draws the 2 outside lines for more of a rounded corner look. To put it simply, it draws crease lines as if you're combining Mode 1 and 2. Spacing only applies to Mode 2 and 3. The spacing is the distance between the 2 outside lines. Count determines the number of passes for each creasing line drawn. For instance, if you find that your crease line is too faint for your liking, you can have the cutter repeat the creasing lines over and over again so that you don't have to repeat them within the software. The start and end point values allow you to shorten your lines. These settings are part of the condition and thus will have to be tested and adjusted. Let's test this condition. Press Test once, and then press F1 for Test 1. This will use the creaser tool and make a pattern that's different from the cutting pattern on our material. The pattern will have to be examined closely to see if the crease lines are defined enough. Once the test pattern is to our liking, press Enter. If not, the values can be adjusted. In this case, the settings are good, so we can press enter. As a tip, once the conditions have been configured, write them down on a list that you can post near the cutter. This way, if there's going to be more than one user, instead of guessing which condition is assigned to what material, there is a list for reference. So far in this lesson, we have covered the basics of each condition, such as configuring the force, speed, offset, and quality. There are, however, other advanced condition settings or options to adjust as well. In this part of the lesson, we'll discuss the thick mode, the overlay feature, and as promised, we'll show how to assign a condition to a tool number. The thick mode is a setting used for, as the name implies, thicker material. With thicker material, sometimes there is a difficulty maneuvering the blade around each corner. When enabled for a condition, the thick mode has the tool lift the blade out of the material and swivels the blade by lightly touching it to the material to position it in the next direction. And then it comes down and continues cutting the next segment. This prevents the blade from tearing the material on each corner and provides a way to obtain clean corners. Each condition has a thick mode setting. For instance, currently the condition is set to condition 1. Recall that earlier we configured this condition for cutting. To enable thick mode for this condition, we have to use the menu. To get there, press pause. Press the next key until Tool Condition appears, or Tool COND. Press F2 for Tool Condition. Press F1 for Thick. And then press F1 again for Thick Number. Notice that there are two rows. The top row is the condition number. The bottom row shows by a check mark which condition has the thick mode enabled. In this case, the thick mode is currently disabled for each condition. By using the side arrow keys, we can move that blinking cursor to which condition we want to enable thick mode. Let's move it back to condition 1 and enable it by pressing the up arrow key. As mentioned, the check mark appears indicating that thick mode is enabled for that condition. Pressing the down arrow key disables the mode. In this case, we want to turn on thick mode for condition 1 and press enter to accept the new settings. Finally, press pause to exit to ready mode. Once thick mode is enabled for that condition, it will have a blinking cursor over the tool number indicating that it is enabled for that condition. Now, every time this condition is adjusted and enter is pressed to accept the new changes, this thick mode menu appears. This allows for making adjustments to how thick mode will work. The top row has two modes. Mode 1 performs overcutting for all the corners of the design. Mode 2 performs overcutting for only the start endpoint, but not the corners. We have found that Mode 1 is best in most cases since it provides cleaner cuts on thicker materials. Mode 2 is generally a faster process, but designed mainly for thinner materials. The start and end values determine how far the blade is going to extend beyond the endpoints on the overcuts. In this case, we'll just leave it as is and press enter. The next condition feature is particularly useful when cutting materials that are harder than normal. What often happens when cutting hard material is the job has to be sent repeatedly until the blade cuts through the material. This is where the overlay feature can help. This feature saves time in that instead of sending the job multiple times to cut through the material, this feature, when enabled, automatically cuts the design repeatedly. It too can be enabled for each condition. It works by scoring the pattern on the first pass using a lighter cutting force than the specified force value. This will enable a path that the blade can follow when repeating the cuts. Then the higher specified force value is used for the subsequent cuts to follow. To enable this function, press pause. Press the next key until the Tool Condition menu option appears. Press F2 for Tool Condition. Press F1 for Thick. and then press F2 for overlay, which will display the overlay mode settings screen. There are two methods of repeated cutting: all mode and block mode. The all mode method cuts the whole job before it starts on the following passes. Block mode cuts the same line repeatedly before cutting the next line. As to which one is best depends on the situation, but in this case, all mode will be used so that it cuts everything before it starts on the second repeat cut. Finally, press Enter to accept the changes. The overlay menu is designed similar to the thick mode, where the top row represents the 8 conditions, and the bottom row represents how many repeated cuts we want for the individual conditions. The cursor is at condition 1. To increase the number of passes, press the up arrow. This value can be set up to 9 repeats. In this case though, the material only requires 3 repeats. Once again, this means that when condition 1 is used, it will cut each path 3 times. We can press Enter to accept the values. This next menu may be confusing, but recall that when the overlay function is enabled for a certain condition, each time that condition is used to cut material, it will cut the first score with a different condition with a lighter force. All subsequent cuts will use the current condition with the higher force. Both conditions must share the same parameters of speed, offset, and quality, and differ only in force. For demonstration purposes, we've already configured condition 2 to match the settings of condition 1, except for the fact that it has a lower force. Therefore, this number will be set to 2. Once again, press Enter to accept the settings. To provide a better idea of how this works, when the job is sent from the computer, the cutter switches to condition 2, and cuts the first pass at a lighter force, scoring the media. After it's finished, it will switch to condition 1 and cut the remaining passes with the higher force. Keep in mind too that there are 8 other conditions, any of which can be used for this purpose. Now we can pull the piece out and check its edges for a clean cut. The next advanced option for a condition is to assign a condition to a tool. Recall that each condition is either assigned to Tool 1 or Tool 2. Recall also that, by default, conditions 1 through 4 are assigned to Tool 1, and conditions 5 through 8 are assigned to Tool 2. This can be reconfigured. For instance, let's keep conditions 1 and 2 assigned to Tool 1, and conditions 3 and 4 assigned to Tool 2. This way we can easily switch between conditions that use both Tool 1 and Tool 2, rather than having to press each function button twice to get to conditions 5 through 8. Start by opening the menu by pressing pause. Press Next until this menu appears. Press F2 for tool condition, and then press F2 again for tool number. This menu is similar to thick mode and overlay in that the top row represents the 8 conditions, and the bottom row shows what tool the condition is assigned to. As mentioned, conditions 1 through 4 are assigned to Tool 1, and conditions 5 through 8 are assigned to Tool 2. In this case though, conditions 1 and 2 will still be assigned to Tool 1, but conditions 3 and 4 are to be assigned to Tool 2. To make this change, we'll press the right arrow to move the blinking cursor to the right so that it's underneath the number 3. And then press either the up or down key, it doesn't matter, to toggle to the setting of 2. We can press the right arrow key again to move the blinking cursor so that it's under the 4, or condition 4, and press the up or down arrow key to set it to 2 as well. We now have both condition 3 and 4 assigned to Tool 2. Let's press the Enter key to accept these values. To check this, we can press pause to return the cutter to ready mode. Press F2, which will switch to Tool 1. Then press F3 to switch to condition 3, and it switches to Tool 2. Press F1 and it switches to Tool 1. And then finally press F4 and it switches back to Tool 2 exactly the way we want it.